Okay, I understand nobody subscribed to my channel for Broadway musical analysis, but here we are. Also, I should mention, I have never seen the Broadway show Hadestown. I've only listened to the soundtrack, completely blind. And the soundtrack does a hell of a job giving you the story. I feel like I didn't miss a beat and have no questions. I listened to this thing and became obsessed with it to the point that I listened to it about 50 times within a couple weeks, and I have to get these feelings out. I advise you all listen to the Hadestown soundtrack before continuing. I'd hate to spoil it, not just because it's a great narrative, but because the music absolutely kicks ass. And the music is really what makes it worth experiencing. Link in the description. There's not a single miss in the 2-hour runtime, I feel. And a good handful of tracks are nominees for my favorite songs of all time. It's got jazzy instrumentation, it's got amazing vocalists, it's got some blues in there, I'm pretty sure. Although my definition of blues is just sad harmonica and guitar. There's a few sappy love songs that some people might find hard to stomach, but I also love those too. It's just great all around. It's a pleasant listen, even ignoring the narrative. Also, I will be playing none of the music because I've had videos taken down for music before and I would like to avoid it if possible. And I'm gonna have like no editing in this video just to try and pull you into my perspective while I listen to this thing. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Hadestown is a story about many things, but let's just get the premise out of the way for the goofs who haven't listened to it yet. In the opening song, Hermes, our narrator, is a framing device and he says this is an old song, it's a love song, but most importantly, it's a tragedy, and he's choosing to sing it again. This is basically the most important detail for our purposes today, so don't forget it. The story follows two couples, the first of which is Hades and Persephone, the gods of the underworld and spring respectively. They are basically going through a real rough patch in their relationship. They're losing trust in each other, Hades is making some radical changes in the underworld, and not allowing Persephone to stay outside the underworld for very long. And as a result, spring and summer basically don't exist anymore. They last for like a week at a time within the narrative, and that throws the whole world out of balance. Constant plague, drought, famine, all that good stuff. Oh, the time period is also vague as hell, but I imagine it is something in like the 1930s Great Depression period. We got railroad tracks and automobiles, and Hadestown itself is described as a modern city, sort of. But basically because Persephone can't stay above ground for very long, everyone is poor and everyone is starving to death. And that brings us to our second couple, Orpheus and Eurydice. Now Orpheus is described by Hermes the narrator as such. Orpheus was a poor boy, but he had a gift to give. He can make you see the way the world could be, in spite of the way that it is. And this comes to mean many different things by the end of the story. But for now, just think of Orpheus as a talented musician who is very optimistic, and maybe a bit naive. He's basically the hero and protagonist. And Eurydice is described as a hungry young girl, a runaway from everywhere she'd ever been. She was no stranger to the world, no stranger to the wind. Throughout the musical, the wind is a metaphor for misfortune and hard times, the dangers of poverty, and all the stuff we talked about earlier. The wind constantly comes up in Eurydice's lyrics and ballads, because Eurydice is basically black-pilled and cynical as a result of her poor situation, and rightfully so. But Orpheus pulls her out of her funk and manages to cheer her up for a time. He also has a literal magic song in the works that he claims will make spring return. So after hearing him sing the unfinished song, Eurydice agrees to become his wife and decides she's gonna take care of this boy, find him food, and keep him fed until he can finish that darn song. And not long after, they have a genuine, budding romance. But as times get worse, Orpheus feels more pressured to finish the song as soon as possible. Not for just himself and Eurydice, but for everyone's sake. But as a result, he begins neglecting Eurydice and makes her burden even heavier, because she's the sole breadwinner in the relationship and she can barely feed herself, let alone someone else. Even when they are in desperate need of food and firewood and Eurydice asks Orpheus to take a break and help her, he doesn't listen. Orpheus just keeps working on his song and leaves the burden on Eurydice. This is where Hades comes in and offers to take Eurydice as a mistress or a pet, more accurately, promising to take care of her, and under the protection of the most rich and powerful god, she'd never be hungry again. So after tormenting herself over the situation, she decides to step on the train with a one-way ticket to the underworld. Now Hades is only doing this because he wants to spite Persephone and entertain himself, because they're still having that big fight. He doesn't actually care about Eurydice at all. Now one thing that I always keep in mind in this part of the story is how much focus is put on Orpheus's inaction. Eurydice cried out his name several times in these stretch of songs, but he never comes, he never listens. He never responds to her immediate need for food, firewood, or even just for his emotional support. He's just too darn busy with that song. And Hermes, the narrator and sort of a surrogate father to Orpheus, even teases the boy for not hearing Eurydice as she's being stalked by the king of the underworld. Orpheus, realizing his mistake, decides he's gonna walk to Hadestown himself and rescue her. Now this is about the halfway point in the musical. From here onward, it's basically the conflict between Orpheus and Hades, with Eurydice regretting her decision and Persephone trying to support both of them against her husband. But to give you the skinny of it, Hades has trust issues because he's a lonely man. He has to let go of his wife for 6 months every 6 months. And considering how awesome and happy everyone is during spring, he fears that Persephone may leave him for good one day. After all, when their relationship started, they were much like Orpheus and Eurydice. The parallels between the two couples are numerous and constantly reminded and used in the lyrics. In the beginning, Hades had nothing but a cold underworld, but he was able to win over Persephone with love and affection, and a neat little song. But out of constant fear that she'll grow unhappy here, he works to amass power and wealth to pamper her. He tries to make something out of his desolate kingdom in order to impress her and secure his hold on her. It's dark in the underground and Persephone loves the sun, so he built a power grid and lit neon lights. It's cold and nothing grows, so he built a foundry, etc. It's actually not very different from Orpheus, who had nothing of material value to give Eurydice. Just a poor, cold, hungry life. But they stayed together for good old love, baby. Until the wind became too strong, pushing Eurydice to leave. Hades' fear of Persephone leaving him behind in spite of their love is a realistic one, given how it can push other couples apart. So now we come to my favorite song, and easily the one that works best as a standalone track. Why We Build the Wall. This is Hades' villain song, basically. He's a man misguided by fear, doubt, and greed. The lyrics are repetitive and simple, a back and forth chant between him and his workers. It's basically propaganda to inspire them to keep working and to make them feel privileged to work in Hadestown. And in a way they are. The world above is full of problems, cause no spring, no life, no food. But life in Hadestown is a struggle of its own. The lyrics are self-justifying in a circular way. We build the wall to keep us free, the wall keeps out the enemy is poverty, and the outsiders want our work, and our work is never done. It's a soul-crushing chant meant to keep the workers' heads low and in line. Like any good piece of propaganda, it creates an enemy and gives a purpose to idle hands while giving them only what Hades wants them to hear and nothing more. And this is propaganda true to life. Many companies push the agenda that work makes you fundamentally more moral than those that don't. And in a way it does. Even if it's in an abstract or indirect way, your labor moves some sort of system that benefits a customer of some sort. Maybe you learn a few things and you earn your keep for yourself and your family. But they do this by demonizing the impoverished. And in a subtle way threatening workers like, oh, if you don't play by our rules, we'll fire you and give someone else the privilege of being an upstanding citizen. There's definitely socialist undertones throughout this musical, or at the very least capital critical undertones. Like one of the main morals of the story is chasing after excess profit at the cost of a spiritual fulfillment is bad, or how defining yourself with your work will make you miss out on life. Although the fate of the workers is left fairly ambiguous in the end, I like to imagine Hades is a slightly better boss, if only for Persephone's sake. Oh, by the way, the next song, Our Lady of the Underground, is just Persephone basically being like a crack dealer to all the workers like, psst, I got the stuff. I got sunshine, man. I got sunshine up on a shelf. I got the rain on tap at the bar. I know you want some. The next individual song I want to talk about is a solo by Eurydice. Flowers may appear to be nothing more than Eurydice regretting her choice at first glance, but upon re-listening to it, it really opens up a new reading for her character. That being that her trip to the underworld is an analog or a metaphor for suicide. It opens with, all I wanted was to close my eyes and disappear. Like a petal on the stream, like a feather on the air. And looking at lyrics from her past songs such as I Want a Nice Soft Place to Land, I Want to Lie Down Forever, from Hey Little Songbird, and what may be the most important, in Come Home With Me, when she first meets Orpheus, Hermes being a total bro is acting as a wingman and says that Orpheus can make her feel alive. But in Flowers we see lyrics like Lily white and poppy red, I trembled when he laid me out, you won't feel a thing he said when you go down. The idea that she gave up her hunger and pain for an unfeeling afterlife is blatant. Lilies themselves even being a flower symbolic of death because of their traditional use in funerals. And this may just be my Canadian brain at work, but poppies are symbolic of a remembrance of death, typically a violent one. Oh, also Hermes says, and I quote, "Eurydice was a hungry young girl, but she wasn't hungry anymore. What she was instead was dead." So yeah, not subtle at all, but subtlety is overrated. Eurydice was just too overwhelmed with dealing with poverty day in and day out. Made better by a time for Orpheus, but ultimately made worse when he started neglecting her and she had to support them both. This really puts into perspective how Orpheus is similar to Hades. He ignored the needs of his lover in favor of chasing a materialistic happiness. Of course, Orpheus isn't wrong to work on his song and to try and bring spring back, especially given the circumstances, but when your wife is calling out your name, you should keep an ear open. The main difference between Orpheus and Hades is that with age, Hades has become jaded and cynical and fearful of losing Persephone. So he decides to use his power to force Persephone to stay, only letting her leave for days or weeks at a time. Basically from here on, Orpheus uses youth and his optimism and music to convince the residents of the underworld to unionize and uprise against Hades. And he eventually reminds Hades of the joys of love and how fighting for it in this way defeats the entire purpose of that love. That fighting to defend this kind of love is like defending a fire that's about to go out. You gotta rekindle it before anything else, and his walls are smothering out what flames are left. The big emotional climax of this musical is undoubtedly Epic 3. Now I like the approach and progressions of Epic 1, 2, and 3. Repeated because it's the song Orpheus spends the whole story working on, hoping to bring spring back. The first one is Orpheus singing about the original tale of Hades and Persephone and how they met, with 2 being the current lover spat situation, but from the perspective of an outsider who only sees Hades as a nuisance or a malicious greedy character, and 3 happening after Orpheus got to meet and know Hades himself, when he can see past all the walls and misfortune he builds and sees the burdens Hades is placing on himself, how he keeps his head low and his back bent out of fear of losing what he has built. He sees how genuine his love still is, it's just being misguided by fear and self-doubt. So after a huge epic ballad, Hades is finally full of optimism again, and is ready to give up his hold on Persephone and let her bring spring again. But those damn workers are still looking to unionize and Hades refuses to show weakness in front of them. So instead of letting Orpheus and Eurydice go, he gives them a test. They can walk out of hell, but only if Orpheus walks in front and does not turn around to check if Eurydice is still following him. Now I'm sure to many of you that sounds easy, but the road out of hell is long, cold, and dark. And like the man Hermes says, it's nothing compared to the road inside your head. The strongest point Hades makes is how isolation conquers trust. Anyone can be strong as long as they have support from others. Even the powerless workers can be a threat to the boss when they stand shoulder to shoulder, which is why Hades went through so much trouble to keep their heads low. But when people are alone and they can't see or feel others, they become scared and doubtful. And Orpheus, this incredibly optimistic young man, at this point a hero who changed the minds of gods themselves and is about to escape from hell, fails. He turns around because he begins to doubt Eurydice, himself, and Hades. Eurydice abandoned me before, why would she follow me into the poor life again? I'm just some powerless nobody, why would Hades let me win? Is he tricking me? And one thing that's easy to forget, because it only comes up like twice, is how Orpheus was abandoned by his mother as a child. That may have played a part in his succumbing in the end as well. This outcome is very strongly empathetic to Hades, because Hades was basically living through that trial every year for 6 months, and Orpheus can't keep himself together without support long enough to walk out of hell. Unlike how Eurydice made the wrong choice to go to the underworld when Orpheus wasn't by her side sufficiently supporting her. When the characters are alone, doubt comes in, and they're at their most vulnerable. Another similar point made is how when people have nothing to lose, they can be bold, even when alone. But when they have something, be it wealth, power, or a lover in their hands, they start fearing that they'll lose their grip, and sometimes that leads them to the wrong decision. Orpheus and Eurydice are separated then and there, and that's how the story ends. But we still have 2 songs left. Optimism versus pessimism is a decent way to boil the conflict between Hades and Orpheus down. But even Orpheus failed to perfectly live up to his ideals, when he neglected Eurydice and when he was conquered by doubt in the end. But now is where we start talking about Mr. Hermes, the narrator and audience surrogate. Why would someone sing a sad song over and over again? Well, besides the fact that tragedies can be compelling stories and Broadway musicals love playing with diegesis, I think most would say tragedies make for stories of what you're not supposed to do, a preventative tale to keep you from doing bad things or getting yourself into trouble. To reinforce that the world is an imperfect place where even good people can be crushed. But Hermes has a much more uplifting and inspiring takeaway from this tale. To know how it ends but to still sing it again anyway, doesn't mean you want to reinforce how things are, how events and tragedies happened in the past. It's true bad things happened and we can't change the past, the story was written long ago. But to sing the song again is to listen to Orpheus, and to let him show you the way the world could be, in spite of the way that it is. Singing the song doesn't mean resigning yourself to how helpless changing the world is. It's to inspire you to try and change it yourself. Even if you fail, your story isn't over yet. Orpheus can't help himself or the girl he loves anymore, but he can make others want to do better. In the end, Hades and Persephone were inspired to reignite their love and try again, and Hermes himself was inspired by Orpheus to tell this tale specifically because he thinks it can help people, mainly the audience, to see the way the world could be. And I can't think of a more beautiful tragedy than that. In fact, I think I'll start viewing more tragic endings that way. A chance to see the way the world could be and what couldn't be done in spite of the way it is. Again, please listen to Hadestown yourself or actually watch the musical if you can. You can listen to it for free on YouTube, link in the description. I haven't even touched on all the narrative elements I like. I barely talked about Persephone or how the muses are basically the dark and cynical thoughts of every character. I missed quite a bit. Hi, Future Puff here. I was just listening to this idiot talk about Hadestown and not even mentioning, barely mentioning Persephone. So yeah, I'm just gonna shove it in here. Alright, here we go. Persephone's probably the character with the least amount of flaws, I think. I mean, she does have a drinking problem, but it's pretty clear that Hades is the one really pushing the relationship down. The Persephone myth has been adapted many a time because it does connect with people who had abusive relationships, for obvious reasons. When I say Persephone's the character with the least amount of flaws, she's also sort of the ideal, like she's a socialite, and loneliness is something that, a lot of the characters struggle with, like, I said before. All the characters make their worst mistakes when they're alone, and, Persephone just wants to keep everyone company. She's very cheerful, she wants to keep everyone's spirits up. She doesn't really struggle with loneliness because she gets along with as many people as she possibly can. And I love how this is illustrated by Persephone taking note of, like, individual people. Like, obviously the big contrast here is, like, when Hades is doing a song, like, Why We Build the Wall, like, or a chant, like, all the backing singers are in unison, they're like a big crowd of people. Whereas, like, when Living It Up on Top, like, everyone has an individual voice. Aside from just being able to hear Hermes and Orpheus, you could hear a bunch of individual people multiple times throughout the song. Like, it's very fun. And, in Our Lady of the Underground, she'll literally just take a whole minute just to rattle off all of the musicians. It's great. I love her. The end. Of course, I can't tell this tale even a tenth as well as the music can, so give it a listen. So raise your cups and drink them up. Press F for Orpheus and Eurydice in the comments, and good night, brothers. Good night.
Songbird versus rattlesnake.